Hi, I'm Bianca. They called me the Invisible One, the family disappointment who would never amount to anything more than cleaning up after successful people. My brother told the entire family I was nothing but a janitor and would never understand real business. 5 years later, I stood in his company's boardroom presenting the solution that would save their failing tech empire while he sat speechless, watching me command the room he thought I'd never belong in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was always the one who noticed what others overlooked. Not because I was particularly gifted, but because my job literally required me to see every corner, every crack, every detail that busy executives rushed past without a second glance. My name is Bianca Rodriguez, and I grew up in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, in a family that measured success by corner offices and quarterly reports. My brother Marcus was the golden child, 8 years older than me, already climbing the corporate ladder at TechFlow Solutions by the time I graduated high school with barely passing grades and no clear direction. Marcus married Christine when I was 19, a brilliant marketing executive from an Ivy League background who spoke in analytics and growth metrics. From the moment she entered our family, she looked at me like I was a statistical anomaly that didn't fit into any successful algorithm. The underachiever, she'd call me at family gatherings, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone explaining a simple concept to a child, still figuring out her path. How interesting. Everyone would nod politely while I served drinks at family barbecues, already relegated to the helper role that seemed to define my place in the Rodriguez hierarchy. I didn't want the corporate track that Marcus had chosen or the advanced degrees that Christine collected like trophies. I wanted to understand how things really worked, not from textbooks or presentations, but from the ground up. After high school, I took a job with Clean Tech Services, a commercial cleaning company that serviced office buildings throughout downtown Denver. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that paid my bills and gave me something my family couldn't understand: perspective. While Marcus and Christine collected promotions and networking opportunities, I collected observations and insights from the real world of business operations. I worked the night shift, moving through empty offices after the executives went home, seeing the aftermath of their decisions played out in overflowing trash bins, hastily abandoned projects, and the physical evidence of corporate stress. I learned more about company culture from cleaning executive bathrooms than most people learn from MBA programs. I remember the night everything started to shift. It was my 24th birthday, and instead of celebrating, I was working a double shift at TechFlow Solutions. Marcus had gotten our company the contract to clean their new headquarters, a gleaming 40-story tower in downtown Denver that housed some of the most innovative tech companies in the region. I wore my standard uniform, navy blue polo with clean tech embroidered on the chest, my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, trying to stay invisible as I moved through the halls where my brother made his reputation. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was literally cleaning up after my brother's colleagues while he attended board meetings and strategy sessions on the executive floors I wasn't allowed to access. That night, I was emptying trash bins on the 32nd floor when I overheard a conversation that would change everything. The lights were dimmed, and I assumed the floor was empty, but voices carried from the corner conference room where Marcus and 3 other executives were having what sounded like a crisis meeting. Their voices were tense, frustrated, and I caught fragments of their conversation as I worked nearby. Customer retention dropping, user engagement plummeting, competitor platforms gaining market share. They were talking about data analytics, user behavior patterns, and the disconnect between their platform design and actual user needs. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I slowed my work, listening more carefully, my mind automatically processing the problems they were describing. From my perspective, as someone who saw the physical evidence of their stress every day, who watched these executives work late into the night struggling with the same issues month after month, I began to understand the patterns they couldn't see from inside their corner offices. They were designing for the users they thought they had, not the users they actually served. They were making decisions based on theoretical models instead of real-world behavior. As I continued cleaning that floor over the following weeks, I started paying closer attention to the documents in their trash, the notes left on whiteboards, the conversations I accidentally overheard. Not because I was spying, but because their problems were fascinating puzzles that my mind couldn't stop working on. I saw inefficiencies they couldn't recognize, patterns they hadn't noticed, solutions they hadn't considered because they were too close to the problem. I started keeping a notebook, writing down observations about workflow patterns, user interface issues I noticed when cleaning workstations, and ideas about how their processes could be streamlined. It began as curiosity, but gradually became something more focused, more intentional. I was developing insights about business operations that no one in my family would have believed I was capable of understanding. 3 months later, at Marcus and Christine's housewarming party for their new suburban mansion, the conversation that would define our relationship for years finally happened. The house was impressive, all modern architecture and smart home technology, filled with Marcus's colleagues and Christine's networking contacts. I arrived after my shift, still wearing my work clothes because I'd come straight from cleaning a different office building, and immediately felt out of place among the business casual crowd discussing market disruption and growth strategies. The dining room was set with expensive china and crystal glasses, Marcus at the head of the table like he was chairing a board meeting, Christine to his right orchestrating conversation like a skilled moderator. Their colleagues filled the other seats, all discussing quarterly projections and industry trends, with the confidence of people who'd never questioned their place in the corporate hierarchy. I sat quietly at the far end of the table, trying to blend in while they talked about innovation and leadership. Finally, Christine turned to me with that practiced smile she used when acknowledging someone beneath her professional level. "So Bianca," she said, her voice carrying just enough volume to draw everyone's attention, "tell everyone about your work. I'm sure they'd find it interesting to hear about the service industry perspective." I felt heat rise in my cheeks as every conversation stopped and all eyes turned to me. "I work for Cleantech Services," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady despite the spotlight. "We handle commercial cleaning for office buildings throughout downtown Denver." Marcus set down his wine glass with a slight clink that seemed to punctuate the silence. His expression shifted, embarrassment mixing with something harder, more defensive. He glanced around the table at his colleagues, then back at me. "That's right," he said, his tone carrying an edge I'd never heard before. "Bianca cleans offices. She's very thorough at what she does." One of his colleagues, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and designer jewelry, leaned forward with the kind of curiosity people show toward exotic animals at a zoo. "How interesting," she said. "Do you enjoy the work? It must be so different from what we do here." Before I could answer, Marcus continued, his voice gaining momentum like he was building toward a point. "She's always been the practical one in our family. Not everyone is cut out for strategic thinking or complex problem solving. Some people are better suited for hands-on work that doesn't require advanced analysis or leadership skills." The words hit like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to establish a hierarchy that put me firmly at the bottom. Christine nodded supportively, her hand reaching across the table to squeeze Marcus's arm in a gesture of solidarity. "That's so important, though," she added, her voice carrying that patronizing tone people use when trying to make someone feel better about their limitations. "Every organization needs people who can handle the basic operational tasks. It's honest work." I looked around the table at faces that showed polite interest mixed with pity, these successful professionals now seeing me as someone to feel sorry for, rather than someone to take seriously. Marcus continued, warming to his theme like he was delivering a presentation. "The thing about business today is that it requires sophisticated thinking, complex analysis, understanding of market dynamics and user psychology. You can't just work harder, you have to work smarter, think strategically, see the big picture." He paused, took a sip of wine, then delivered the line that would echo in my head for years. "Bianca's a hard worker, don't get me wrong, but she's nothing but a janitor. She doesn't have the education, the experience, or the analytical mindset to understand how real businesses operate. She sees the surface level, the basic maintenance, but she'll never grasp the strategic complexity that drives actual success." The silence that followed felt like a vacuum, every person at the table suddenly finding their food very interesting. I sat there, hands steady on my water glass, feeling the weight of their judgments settle around me like a heavy blanket. But underneath the humiliation, something else was building. A quiet anger, not at being underestimated, but at being dismissed so completely that they couldn't imagine I might see things they'd missed. I took a deep breath, looked directly at Marcus, and said quietly, "Actually, I think there might be some strategic insights that come from seeing how businesses actually function day to day, not just how they look in presentations and reports." Marcus laughed. The sound sharp and dismissive. Like what? What could you possibly know about business strategy that we don't already understand? The challenge hung in the air between us, and I realized this was my moment to either accept their definition of my limitations or push back against it. I could have said nothing, could have smiled and changed the subject, could have accepted my place as the family disappointment who would never measure up to their corporate achievements. Instead, I said, "I know that TechFlow Solutions is losing customers because your user interface doesn't match how people actually work. I know that your data analytics platform is failing because it's designed for how executives think users behave, not how they actually behave. I know that your customer retention problems aren't about pricing or features, they're about usability and workflow integration." The table went completely silent. Marcus's face changed, surprise replacing condescension. "How could you possibly know anything about TechFlow's internal operations?" "Because I clean your offices," I said simply. "I see the evidence of your problems every night. The frustrated notes on whiteboards, the printed emails about user complaints, the abandoned projects that get thrown away after weeks of work. I see the real impact of your strategic decisions, played out in the physical workspace that you leave behind." Christine's expression hardened, her marketing expertise kicking in with damage control instincts. "That's completely inappropriate," she said firmly. "Corporate cleaning staff shouldn't be reading confidential documents or eavesdropping on private conversations." "I'm not reading confidential documents," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I'm seeing the evidence of systemic problems that are hiding in plain sight. When executives work late every night for months, when project materials get discarded repeatedly, when the same workflow issues keep appearing in casual conversations, those aren't secrets. Those are patterns that anyone paying attention would notice." Marcus's colleague, the blonde woman, looked between us with growing interest. "What kind of patterns?" she asked, her business instincts apparently overriding social awkwardness. Marcus cut her off quickly. "This is ridiculous. Bianca, you're way out of your depth here. These are complex business challenges that require years of experience and advanced education to understand. You can't just observe surface-level symptoms and think you understand root causes." But I had started something I couldn't stop. "Maybe you're right," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "Maybe I don't understand the complex theories and advanced methodologies you use to analyze these problems. But I do understand what I see. And what I see is a disconnect between your strategic planning and your operational reality." The conversation shifted then, becoming something different than a family dinner. It became a business discussion where my perspective, despite coming from someone they considered beneath their professional level, introduced ideas they hadn't considered. Not because I was smarter than them, but because I was seeing their problems from an angle they'd never thought to examine. By the end of that evening, the dynamic had shifted. I was still the janitor, still the family disappointment who didn't fit their definition of success. But I was also something else. I was someone who noticed things they missed, who understood aspects of their business that their advanced degrees and strategic frameworks hadn't prepared them to see. Marcus and Christine didn't suddenly respect my perspective, but they couldn't entirely dismiss it either. The seeds of something had been planted that night, something that would grow over the following months, as I continued observing, analyzing, and developing insights about business operations from my unique vantage point at the intersection of strategic planning and operational reality. I drove home that night in my used Honda Civic, still wearing my work uniform, but carrying something I'd never had before. Not their approval, not their acceptance, but my own clear understanding of my value. I wasn't nothing but a janitor. I was someone who saw what others missed, who understood what others overlooked, who could identify solutions to problems that stumped executives with decades of experience. The challenge now wasn't proving them wrong. The challenge was proving myself right. And for the first time since graduating high school without direction or distinction, I had a clear sense of what that might look like. I was going to transform my observations into insights, my patterns into solutions, and my unique perspective into something that couldn't be dismissed or overlooked. I spent that night writing in my notebook, not just observations now, but actual analysis. Real solutions to the problems I'd been watching TechFlow struggle with for months. Technical specifications for user interface improvements, workflow modifications that would increase efficiency, customer engagement strategies based on actual user behavior rather than theoretical models. I was building something they would have to take seriously, something that would force them to see me not as the family failure who cleaned their offices, but as someone who understood their business better than they understood it themselves. The janitor who saw what the executives missed, who solved problems that stumped strategic planners, who proved that sometimes the most valuable insights come from the most unexpected perspectives. Marcus had called me nothing but a janitor, had dismissed my potential so completely that he couldn't imagine I might contribute something meaningful to the business world he inhabited. But he was about to learn that underestimating someone's capability based on their current position is one of the most expensive mistakes a leader can make. And I was about to show him exactly how expensive that mistake could be. The weeks following that dinner party felt like living in two different worlds. During the day, I cleaned offices and restocked supplies, invisible to the executives who rushed past me with their important meetings and urgent deadlines. But at night, in my small apartment in Capitol Hill, I transformed into someone else entirely. Someone who analyzed business problems, researched technological solutions, and developed strategies that could revolutionize how companies understood their own operations. My apartment became a war room of sorts. I converted my dining table into a workspace covered with notebooks, printed articles about user experience design, and sketches of workflow improvements. The walls were covered with charts I'd made, tracking TechFlow's operational patterns, customer complaint themes I'd noticed from overheard conversations, and diagrams showing the disconnect between their current systems and actual user needs. Anyone walking into my apartment would have thought I was running a consulting business, not cleaning offices for minimum wage. The hardest part wasn't the research or the analysis. It was the isolation. I couldn't share my discoveries with my family because they'd already made it clear they considered my perspective worthless. I couldn't discuss my insights with my coworkers at Clean Tech because they were focused on their own survival, not business strategy. I couldn't approach anyone at TechFlow directly because I was just the invisible cleaning woman who wasn't supposed to understand what she observed. So I worked alone, developing my expertise in the shadows while maintaining the facade of someone who was exactly what Marcus had called me, nothing but a janitor. But I was becoming something else, something I didn't even have a name for yet. I was becoming an operational intelligence specialist, someone who could see the gap between corporate strategy and ground-level reality, someone who understood how businesses actually functioned versus how their leaders thought they functioned. My first breakthrough came 3 months after that dinner party. I was cleaning the research and development floor at TechFlow when I noticed a pattern that had been invisible to everyone working there daily. Their main software platform had a user interface problem that was causing customers to abandon tasks halfway through completion, but the executives were interpreting this as a pricing issue and preparing to launch a discount campaign that would destroy their profit margins. The evidence was everywhere once you knew how to look for it. Customer service emails printed and discarded mentioned specific steps where users got confused. Beta testing feedback forms threw away after brief reviews consistently identified the same navigational problems. Screenshots of error messages that appeared on developers' monitors showed exactly where the user experience broke down. But because this information was scattered across different departments and different levels of the organization, no one had connected the dots. I spent 2 weeks documenting everything I observed, creating a comprehensive analysis that traced the customer retention problem to its actual source. A poorly designed menu system that buried essential features 3 clicks deep in confusing subcategories. I outlined the specific changes needed to fix the interface, projected the impact these changes would have on user engagement, and calculated the potential revenue recovery from improved customer retention. The document I created was 47 pages long, complete with charts, diagrams, and technical specifications. It was the most professional analysis I'd ever produced, and I knew it was solid. The question was what to do with it. I couldn't simply hand it to Marcus without revealing how I'd gathered the information. I couldn't submit it through official channels, because I wasn't an employee with access to those systems. I couldn't even discuss it with anyone who might listen, because my credibility was based on a job title that automatically disqualified my opinions. Instead, I decided to test my analysis in a different way. I applied for a part-time position with a small startup called Innovate Tech that was developing productivity software for small businesses. They needed someone to help with customer research and user experience testing, and they were willing to hire based on demonstrated ability rather than formal credentials. The pay was terrible, barely enough to cover my expenses even combined with my cleaning job, but it gave me access to real users and real problems I could solve. Innovate Tech was everything TechFlow wasn't. Lean, flexible, desperate enough to listen to good ideas regardless of where they came from. The founder, David Chen, was a former software engineer who'd left his corporate job to build something better. When I showed him my analysis during the interview, he didn't ask about my education or previous experience. He asked if I could apply the same analytical approach to his company's challenges. Within 6 weeks, the improvements I suggested had increased Innovate Tech's user engagement by 32%. Within 3 months, their customer retention had improved enough to attract their first round of significant investment funding. David started referring to me as his secret weapon, the person who could see problems that everyone else missed and solutions that everyone else overlooked. But I was still cleaning offices at night, still invisible to my family, still watching TechFlow struggle with the exact problems I'd already solved. The irony was almost unbearable. Every night I cleaned their offices, I saw evidence of decisions that were making their problems worse. They were spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on marketing campaigns to attract new customers, while ignoring the interface issues that were driving existing customers away. They were hiring expensive consultants to analyze user behavior, while the real behavioral data was sitting in their trash bins and scattered across their whiteboards. Working 2 jobs meant I was exhausted constantly, running on 4 hours of sleep most nights, and surviving on coffee and determination. My social life disappeared completely. Dating became impossible when I was either cleaning offices or analyzing business problems every waking hour. My bank account stayed empty despite working 60-hour weeks because startup salaries don't cover living expenses, and I couldn't quit my cleaning job without losing my access to the information that made my analysis valuable. The physical toll was significant, but the emotional toll was worse. Watching my family's continued dismissal of my potential while I was secretly developing expertise that could solve their biggest professional challenges created a constant internal conflict. Part of me wanted to prove them wrong immediately, to force them to see what I'd become despite their predictions. But another part of me understood that timing mattered, that I needed to build something undeniable before I could expect them to take me seriously. My relationship with Marcus became increasingly strained during this period. He'd call occasionally to check on me, but his conversations were filled with subtle reminders of my limitations and suggestions that I should be more realistic about my prospects. He'd mention entry-level positions at companies that might hire someone with my background, always emphasizing the word entry-level like it was a generous concession to my lack of qualifications. Christine was even worse, treating me like a charity case who needed guidance about practical career choices. She'd send me job listings for administrative positions and customer service roles, always with helpful notes about how these positions could provide stability and benefits, even if they weren't particularly exciting. Her messages carried the unspoken assumption that exciting work was beyond my capabilities, that I should be grateful for any opportunity to contribute to the business world in a supporting capacity. The worst part was family gatherings, where I had to pretend I was still just the cleaning woman with no prospects for advancement. Christmas dinner that year was particularly brutal. Marcus dominated the conversation with stories about TechFlow's expansion plans and strategic initiatives, while Christine discussed her promotion to senior marketing director and her team's latest campaign successes. When conversation turned to me, it was always brief and pitying. "How's the cleaning business, Bianca?" my father would ask, trying to show interest while clearly hoping the topic would pass quickly. "Are you thinking about taking any classes? Maybe learning some new skills that could help you move up in the company?" The questions were well-intentioned, but reflected their complete inability to imagine that I might be developing skills they hadn't suggested. or pursuing opportunities they couldn't see. I'd answer vaguely, mentioning that I was exploring some possibilities and learning new things, but I couldn't explain what I was really doing without revealing the extent of my observations at TechFlow. Meanwhile, my work at Innovate Tech was attracting attention beyond David's small company. Other startups began reaching out, asking if I could help them with similar analytical challenges. Word was spreading through Denver's entrepreneurial community about someone who could identify operational problems that traditional consultants missed, someone who understood how businesses actually functioned rather than how they were supposed to function. I started freelancing on weekends, taking on projects that let me apply my unique analytical approach to different industries and different types of problems. A restaurant chain that was losing customers despite popular menu items. A retail company that couldn't understand why their online sales were declining. A healthcare practice that was struggling with patient satisfaction despite excellent medical outcomes. In each case, I found the same pattern. A disconnect between leadership assumptions and operational reality that was invisible to people working inside the system. My reputation grew quietly, through word-of-mouth recommendations and successful project outcomes. I wasn't networking at industry events or building a professional brand through social media. I was simply solving problems that other people couldn't solve, building expertise through practical application rather than theoretical study. But this underground success created its own challenges. The more capable I became, the more frustrated I felt with my family's continued dismissal of my potential. The breaking point came 8 months after that dinner party conversation. I was cleaning the executive floor at TechFlow when I overheard Marcus in a heated discussion with his team about their latest crisis. Their customer retention had dropped to critical levels, threatening the company's upcoming merger with a larger technology firm. The deal was worth millions of dollars and represented the culmination of Marcus's career ambitions, but it was contingent on TechFlow maintaining certain performance metrics that they were rapidly failing to meet. I listened to that conversation knowing I had the solution to their problems sitting in my apartment, a comprehensive analysis that could save their merger and transform their business model. But I also knew that approaching them directly would accomplish nothing. Marcus had made it clear that he couldn't imagine me contributing anything valuable to business strategy, and corporate hierarchies don't typically welcome unsolicited advice from cleaning staff, regardless of how accurate that advice might be. Instead, I decided to test my analysis one more time before taking any action that might reveal my hidden expertise. I reached out to David Chen at Innovate Tech and proposed a joint venture project. I would provide the analytical framework and strategic recommendations, while he would provide the technical development resources and industry credibility needed to implement solutions. We would target companies struggling with exactly the problems I'd identified at TechFlow, proving that my approach could work across different organizations and different contexts. The joint venture was successful beyond our expectations. Our first client, a mid-sized software company in Boulder, saw immediate improvements in customer engagement and retention after implementing our recommendations. Our second client, a financial services firm in Colorado Springs, increased their operational efficiency by 26% within 3 months. Word spread quickly through professional networks about this innovative consulting approach that could identify and solve problems that traditional methods missed. Within 6 months, we had a waiting list of companies wanting to hire our services. David handled the business development and client relationships, while I focused on the analytical work and solution development. We were making more money than either of us had ever earned, building a reputation for solving impossible problems, and creating a new category of business consulting that combined technological expertise with operational intelligence. But success in the broader business community only highlighted the continued tension with my family. I was now earning more than Marcus in my consulting work, but I couldn't tell him about it without revealing the source of my expertise. I was solving the exact types of problems that TechFlow struggled with daily, but I couldn't offer to help without exposing my observations of their operations. I was building a career that proved everything they'd said about my limitations was wrong, but I couldn't demonstrate that growth without fundamentally changing our relationship dynamic. The irony was that my success was making family interactions more difficult rather than easier. Marcus would mention TechFlow's challenges during phone calls, complaining about consultants who charged enormous fees but failed to understand their real problems. Christine would discuss her frustrations with marketing campaigns that didn't produce expected results because they were based on customer assumptions that didn't match reality. They were describing exactly the problems I'd learned to solve, exactly the expertise I'd developed, exactly the value I could provide. But they were describing these challenges to someone they still saw as nothing but a janitor, someone whose perspective on business strategy couldn't possibly be relevant to their sophisticated professional problems. The cognitive dissonance was becoming unbearable. I was living a double life, where my public identity had no connection to my actual capabilities, where my family's perception of my limitations had no relationship to my growing expertise and success. I knew that eventually something would have to give. Either I would have to accept their definition of my limitations and abandon the career I was building in secret, or I would have to find a way to demonstrate my capabilities that they couldn't dismiss or ignore. The middle ground, where I maintained my invisibility while building expertise, was becoming unsustainable as my success grew beyond what I could hide. The decision about how to resolve this tension was made for me when David Chen received a call that would change everything. TechFlow Solutions had reached out through their professional network, looking for consulting help with a critical business problem that was threatening their upcoming merger. They needed someone who could quickly identify and solve customer retention issues that their internal teams and previous consultants had failed to address. David looked at me across our shared office space, understanding immediately what this opportunity represented. "They're offering a contract worth more than we've made all year," he said. "But more importantly, they're offering you the chance to solve the exact problem you've been watching them struggle with for over a year." I stared at the phone in his hand, knowing that accepting this contract would mean stepping out of the shadows, revealing my capabilities to the people who'd dismissed them, risking everything I'd built on the chance that my analysis was strong enough to overcome their preconceptions about my limitations. The scared part of me wanted to refuse, to suggest we focus on other clients who didn't know my background, who could evaluate my work without the baggage of family history and job title assumptions. But the determined part of me, the part that had spent months developing solutions to problems everyone else considered unsolvable, knew this was exactly the opportunity I'd been preparing for. I looked at David and said the words that would finally force my two worlds to collide. "Schedule the meeting. It's time to show them what they've been missing." The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in TechFlow's main conference room on the 38th floor. I had cleaned that room dozens of times, emptying trash bins and wiping down the massive mahogany table where executives made decisions worth millions of dollars. Now I would be sitting at that same table, presenting solutions to problems I'd watched them struggle with for over a year. David insisted we arrive together in his Tesla, both of us dressed in our best business attire. I wore a charcoal gray suit I'd bought specifically for client presentations, my hair styled professionally, carrying a leather portfolio that contained the analysis I'd been developing in secret for months. Looking at my reflection in the car window, I barely recognized myself. Gone was the invisible cleaning woman in navy blue polo shirts. In her place was someone who looked like she belonged in executive boardrooms. The irony hit me as we walked through TechFlow's lobby, past the security desk where guards had nodded at me dismissively for years when I arrived for night shifts. Today, they treated me with the professional courtesy reserved for important visitors, checking our names against the appointment list and providing visitor badges that granted access to executive floors I'd only seen during cleaning hours. We rode the elevator to the 38th floor in silence, my stomach churning with anticipation and anxiety. Part of me wondered if Marcus would recognize me immediately, if he'd connected the dots between David Chen's consulting firm and his sister who worked for Clean Tech Services. But another part of me suspected that his ability to see me as anything other than a janitor was so limited that even obvious clues wouldn't register. The conference room was exactly as I remembered it, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver, state-of-the-art presentation equipment, and that massive table that seemed designed to intimidate anyone who didn't belong in the upper echelons of corporate hierarchy. But today I wasn't here to clean around their important conversations. Today I was here to lead one. Marcus arrived first, accompanied by Christine and two other executives I recognized from my cleaning observations. He shook hands with David professionally, thanking him for taking on such a challenging project on short notice. Then his eyes moved to me, and I watched his expression change in real time as recognition dawned. His face went through several distinct phases: confusion, recognition, disbelief, and finally a kind of frozen shock that left him speechless for several long seconds. Christine's reaction was even more dramatic. Her composed professional demeanor cracked completely, her mouth actually falling open as she stared at me like I was an hallucination that might disappear if she blinked hard enough. "Bianca?" Marcus finally managed, his voice carrying a mixture of confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. "What are you doing here?" David stepped in smoothly, his professional instincts taking over. "I'd like you to meet my business partner and lead analyst, Bianca Rodriguez. She's the architect of the analytical framework we'll be presenting today. And frankly, she's the reason we've been able to solve problems that traditional consulting approaches have missed." The silence that followed was electric with tension. I could see Marcus's mind working furiously, trying to reconcile the sister he'd dismissed as intellectually limited with the business consultant who'd been recommended by his professional network. Christine looked between David and me like she was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. I decided to take control of the moment before the awkwardness could completely derail our purpose. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us," I said, my voice steady and professional. "I understand you're facing customer retention challenges that are impacting your upcoming merger timeline. I believe we can not only identify the root causes of these issues, but provide actionable solutions that will restore your performance metrics within 60 days. Marcus was still staring at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "You're a business consultant?" he said, the words sounding strange in his mouth. "Since when are you a business consultant?" Since I realized that my unique perspective on operational realities could solve problems that traditional strategic approaches miss, I replied calmly, "Shall we begin the presentation, or would you prefer to discuss my career transition first?" The other executives in the room were clearly picking up on the family tension, but their business priorities overrode social awkwardness. The older woman I recognized as the chief technology officer leaned forward. "We're very interested in hearing your analysis. Our retention numbers have been declining for 8 months, and every consultant we've hired has given us different explanations without providing solutions that actually work." I opened my portfolio and began setting up the presentation I'd refined through months of observation and analysis. David handled the technical setup while I arranged my materials, and I noticed Marcus watching my every movement like he was trying to identify some elaborate deception. The first slide of my presentation contained a chart showing TechFlow's customer retention decline mapped against specific user interface changes they'd implemented over the past year. The correlation was striking and immediately captured everyone's attention. The second slide showed customer service complaint themes that corresponded exactly to the retention drop-off points. As I walked them through my analysis, I watched Marcus's expression change, from confusion to recognition, to something approaching awe. I was presenting information he'd never seen compiled in this way, insights that connected data points his team had been treating as separate issues. The customer retention problem wasn't caused by pricing pressure or competitor features, as their previous consultants had suggested. It was caused by a series of seemingly small interface changes that had made their platform progressively harder to use. The evidence was overwhelming once presented systematically. Screenshots of error messages that appeared during specific user workflows. Documentation of the exact steps where customers abandoned their tasks. Analysis of the cognitive load created by poorly organized menu systems. Projections showing how fixing these issues would impact retention rates and revenue recovery. Christine was taking notes frantically, her marketing background allowing her to immediately grasp the implications of what I was presenting. The CTO was asking detailed technical questions that I answered with specificity that clearly surprised her. But Marcus remained silent, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. 20 minutes into the presentation, I reached the section that would reveal the full extent of my knowledge about their operations. I displayed a workflow diagram that showed exactly how their customer onboarding process created confusion at 3 critical decision points. The diagram was so detailed and accurate that it could only have been created by someone with intimate knowledge of their internal systems. "How did you gather this level of operational detail?" the CTO asked, leaning forward with intense interest. "This is more comprehensive than anything our internal teams have produced." I paused, looking directly at Marcus. Through direct observation of your operational patterns over an extended period, I said carefully. I've had unique access to see how your strategic decisions translate into real-world user experiences and operational outcomes. Marcus's eyes widened as understanding finally dawned completely. You've been watching us, he said slowly. All this time, while you were cleaning our offices, you were studying our business. I was doing my job, I replied evenly, but I was also paying attention to patterns that indicated systemic problems. The evidence of your customer retention issues has been visible for months to anyone who knew how to interpret operational signals. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only had the janitor they'd barely noticed been observing their operations, but she'd been analyzing their problems more effectively than expensive consultants and internal strategy teams. The cognitive dissonance was almost visible on their faces. David stepped in to redirect focus back to solutions. The important thing isn't how we gathered this intelligence, but what we can do with it. Our recommendations include specific interface modifications, workflow optimizations, and user experience improvements that address each identified problem systematically. I continued the presentation, outlining a comprehensive solution plan that included technical specifications, implementation timelines, and projected outcomes. Every recommendation was backed by data I'd collected through months of observation, every solution designed to address root causes rather than symptoms. By the time I finished, the room's energy had completely transformed. What had started as a routine consulting presentation had become something much more significant, a demonstration that their assumptions about capability, expertise, and value were fundamentally flawed. The CTO was the first to speak. This is the most insightful analysis of our operational challenges I've ever seen. How quickly can you begin implementation? David handled the logistics while I watched Marcus process what had just happened. His sister, the one he'd dismissed as intellectually limited, had just delivered a presentation that solved problems his team had been struggling with for months. The woman he'd called nothing but a janitor had demonstrated expertise that his expensive consultants had failed to provide. After the meeting concluded and contracts were signed, Marcus asked if he could speak with me privately. We walked to his corner office, the same space I'd cleaned dozens of times, now entering as an equal rather than invisible service staff. I don't understand, he said, closing the door behind us. How did this happen? When did you become someone who could do what you just did in there? I've always been someone who could see patterns and solve problems, I replied, sitting in the chair across from his desk. The difference is that now I'm in a context where those abilities are valued, rather than dismissed. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from watching him work late nights when I cleaned his office. But you're a janitor, Bianca. You clean offices. You don't have an MBA or strategic experience or technical training. I smiled at the irony of having this conversation in the office where I'd emptied his trash bins while he worked on the exact problems I'd just solved for him. I have something better than theoretical training, Marcus. I have direct observation of how businesses actually function versus how their leaders think they function. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him struggling to reconcile years of assumptions with the evidence he'd just witnessed. All this time, while we thought you were just getting by, you were building a consulting business that's apparently more successful than anything I've achieved. I wasn't building it to compete with you, I said gently. I was building it because I saw problems that needed solving and I had insights that could provide solutions. Your success or failure had nothing to do with my motivation. But you must have known, he said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been regret. You must have known you were capable of more than we gave you credit for. I knew I saw things differently, I replied. I knew I understood aspects of business operations that others missed. But I didn't know if that perspective had real value until I started testing it with clients who were willing to evaluate results rather than credentials. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Marcus asking questions about my business development, my analytical methods, my future plans. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding how I'd built expertise and credibility without following traditional career paths. But underneath his curiosity, I sensed something else: embarrassment about how completely he'd misjudged my potential. and perhaps concern about how this revelation would affect our family dynamic going forward. As I prepared to leave his office, he stopped me with one final question. Bianca, are you angry? About how we treated you? About the things we said? I considered his question carefully before answering. I'm not angry, Marcus. I'm grateful. Your dismissal forced me to prove my capabilities in ways that built stronger foundations than family approval ever could have provided. 3 days later, Christine called me for coffee. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe in Cherry Creek that was equidistant from both our offices. She looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with her coffee cup and avoiding direct eye contact. I owe you an apology, she said finally. Not just for underestimating you, but for being actively dismissive of your potential in ways that were professionally and personally inappropriate. I appreciated her directness. Apology accepted, I said. But I'm more interested in moving forward than relitigating the past. She nodded, then asked the question I'd been expecting. How do we handle this with the family? Everyone still thinks you're working for Clean Tech Services. They don't know about your consulting business or your success or what happened in that boardroom. I've been thinking about that myself, I admitted. Part of me wants to reveal everything immediately, to show everyone how wrong their assumptions were. But another part of me thinks the revelation needs to happen naturally, when it serves a purpose beyond just proving a point. Christine surprised me by laughing. You're handling this with more grace than I would. If our positions were reversed, I'd probably take out a full-page ad in the Denver Post announcing that I'd been underestimated. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Christine, who'd built her career on managing perceptions and controlling narratives, was acknowledging that I was handling a dramatic role reversal with more strategic thinking than she might have managed. Over the following weeks, word began spreading through Denver's business community about the consulting success that had saved TechFlow's merger. Industry publications wrote articles about innovative analytical approaches that combined operational intelligence with strategic planning. Professional networks buzzed with recommendations for David Chen's firm and their mysterious lead analyst who could solve problems that stumped traditional consultants. But within my family, I remained officially just the cleaning woman who was maybe taking some night classes to improve her prospects. The disconnect between my public professional success and my private family identity became increasingly surreal. Marcus began treating me differently during family gatherings, his conversations more respectful, his questions more thoughtful. But he couldn't explain this change in attitude without revealing what he'd learned about my capabilities, so the rest of the family remained unaware of any shift in our dynamic. The tension reached a breaking point during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, 3 weeks after the TechFlow presentation. My father was discussing economic trends affecting local businesses, mentioning several companies that were struggling with operational challenges. Marcus and Christine exchanged glances when he mentioned specific problems that were exactly the type I'd learned to solve. Finally, Marcus couldn't contain himself any longer. Actually, Dad, I know someone who specializes in exactly those kinds of operational problems. Someone who's had remarkable success helping companies identify and solve issues that traditional approaches miss. My father perked up with interest. Really? What's their background? Are they local? Marcus looked at me across the table, a question in his eyes. I nodded slightly, giving him permission to reveal what he'd learned. It's Bianca, he said quietly. She's built a consulting business that's become one of the most successful analytical firms in Denver. She just saved our merger by solving problems that 6 months of expensive consultants couldn't figure out. The silence that followed was profound. My parents stared at me like I'd suddenly revealed I could fly. My aunt and uncle, who'd been visiting for the weekend, looked between Marcus and me like they were trying to understand a joke they'd missed. I understand this might be surprising, I said calmly. I've been developing business expertise for the past 2 years, and it's grown into something more significant than I initially expected. My mother was the first to find her voice. You mean you're not just cleaning offices anymore? You're running a consulting business? I'm still contracted with Clean Tech Services for certain projects, I explained. But my primary focus now is operational analysis for companies that need fresh perspectives on complex problems. The conversation that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced with my family. Questions about my business model, my client base, my revenue streams, my growth plans. For the first time in my life, they were treating me as someone whose professional judgment might be worth seeking. But the most revealing moment came when my father asked how I'd developed such specialized expertise without formal business education. When I explained how my cleaning work had provided unique insights into operational realities that executives couldn't see from inside their systems, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that captured the essential irony of my journey. Sometimes the best view of a mountain comes from the valley below, not from another peak. That dinner marked the end of my double life and the beginning of something new, a family dynamic based on actual understanding of my capabilities rather than assumptions about my limitations. It wasn't a complete transformation overnight, but it was a foundation we could build on. The weeks following the family dinner revelation brought unexpected challenges I hadn't anticipated. Success, I discovered, created its own set of complex dynamics that were harder to navigate than the simple dismissal I'd grown accustomed to. Suddenly, everyone in my family wanted to be involved in my business, offering advice, connections, and partnerships that came with emotional baggage I wasn't sure how to handle. Marcus was the most complicated. He began calling me regularly with business ideas, potential collaborations, and suggestions for how we could work together professionally. His enthusiasm was genuine, but it carried undertones of someone trying to reposition himself in a relationship that had fundamentally shifted. The brother who had once told me I'd never understand real business was now asking if I could help him understand how to apply my analytical methods to other aspects of TechFlow's operations. I established clear boundaries from the beginning, not out of resentment, but out of necessity. My consulting business had grown beyond what David and I could handle alone, and mixing family dynamics with professional relationships seemed like a recipe for complications that could damage both. When Marcus suggested that TechFlow could become our primary client, essentially turning my business into an extension of his company, I declined politely but firmly. This is a separate entity with its own identity and objectives, I explained during one of our coffee meetings. Working with TechFlow on specific projects makes sense, but I'm not interested in becoming a subsidiary of your operations or anyone else's. He seemed surprised by my directness, perhaps expecting that family loyalty would override business considerations. But I'd learned from watching other family businesses that emotional obligations rarely translate into successful professional partnerships. Clear boundaries weren't about rejection. They were about sustainability. Christine's response was more complex. Her marketing background made her immediately understand the value of what I'd built, but her competitive nature struggled with the fact that I'd achieved success in areas she considered her expertise. She began offering to help me develop my brand, create marketing materials, and expand my client base through her professional network. The offers were generous, but they came with subtle implications that I needed her guidance to take my business to the next level. During one particularly intense conversation over lunch, she outlined a comprehensive marketing strategy that would position me as a thought leader in operational intelligence, complete with speaking engagements, industry articles, and social media campaigns. I appreciate the strategic thinking, I told her carefully, but I'm not sure that kind of visibility aligns with my approach. My effectiveness comes from being able to observe and analyze without drawing attention to myself. Becoming a public figure might actually undermine the very perspective that makes my work valuable. She looked puzzled, as if the idea of not wanting maximum visibility was incomprehensible to someone whose career was built on managing public perception. But you could be making so much more money, she insisted. You could be consulting for Fortune 500 companies instead of small startups. You could be charging premium rates for your expertise. Her assumption that bigger and more visible automatically meant better revealed how differently we understood success. I'd spent years building credibility through results rather than reputation, developing expertise through practice rather than promotion. The idea of transforming my business into something designed for maximum visibility rather than maximum impact felt like betraying the principles that had made it successful in the first place. My parents' reaction was perhaps the most touching and the most complicated. They were proud, genuinely excited about my success, but also clearly struggling with guilt about how completely they'd misjudged my potential. My mother began sending me newspaper clippings about successful women entrepreneurs, as if trying to retroactively provide the encouragement she hadn't given when it might have mattered. My father took a different approach, asking detailed questions about my business model and analytical methods with the focused attention of someone trying to understand something that had previously been invisible to him. During one of our conversations, he admitted something that surprised me. "I've been thinking about how many opportunities I might have missed in my own career because I was too focused on traditional metrics of success," he said. "How many innovative solutions I dismissed because they came from unexpected sources or didn't fit conventional frameworks." His reflection wasn't just about our family dynamic, but about his approach to business leadership more broadly. He began asking my opinion about challenges he was facing in his own work, not because he needed my help, but because he was genuinely curious about how my perspective might reveal insights he'd overlooked. These conversations were gratifying, but they also highlighted how my success was forcing everyone in my family to reconsider their assumptions about capability, expertise, and value. The process was positive overall, but it wasn't without friction and awkward moments, as we all adjusted to new roles and dynamics. The most significant test of my approach came when David and I received an offer that could have transformed our business overnight. A major consulting firm in Chicago had learned about our success with TechFlow and wanted to acquire our company, offering enough money to set both of us up financially for life. The offer included executive positions, equity stakes, and the resources to scale our analytical approach to a national level. David was initially excited about the opportunity. "Think about what we could accomplish with their resources," he said, spreading the acquisition proposal across our conference table. "We could help hundreds of companies instead of dozens. We could develop technology platforms that automate our analytical methods. We could become the definitive experts in operational intelligence consulting." But as we discussed the details, I realized that accepting this offer would fundamentally change what we'd built. The acquiring firm wanted to systematize our approach, create standardized methodologies that could be implemented by teams of junior consultants. They wanted to scale our insights by removing the personal observation and contextual analysis that made them valuable. Their vision was to turn our boutique consulting practice into a scalable business unit within their larger organization. My role would shift from hands-on analyst to methodology developer, creating frameworks that other people would implement without the deep understanding that came from direct observation of operational realities. After a week of consideration, I told David that I wanted to decline the offer. He was surprised, pointing out the financial security and professional prestige that acquisition would provide. But I'd learned something important about myself during this process. My satisfaction came from solving problems, not from building scalable systems or managing large teams. The work itself was what motivated me, not the recognition or revenue that came from scaling it beyond what I could personally oversee and quality control. Turning our consulting practice into a corporate division would provide financial rewards, but it would eliminate the direct engagement with problems and solutions that made the work meaningful. David ultimately agreed, understanding that our strength came from staying small enough to maintain quality and personal attention to each client's specific challenges. We declined the acquisition offer and instead focused on refining our approach and taking on projects that aligned with our values and capabilities. This decision surprised my family, particularly Marcus and Christine, who couldn't understand why I'd turned down such a lucrative opportunity. The conversation at Sunday dinner became heated when Christine suggested that I was being unrealistic about business growth and that my reluctance to scale was limiting my potential impact. Sometimes the most valuable contribution you can make is staying true to what works rather than expanding beyond your capabilities, I explained. Not every successful business needs to become a large corporation. Some things work precisely because they remain small and focused. Marcus joined the discussion, his corporate background making him sympathetic to Christine's perspective. "But Bianca, you're leaving money on the table. You're passing up the chance to become a major player in your industry. I'm already making a significant impact with the clients we serve," I replied. "The question isn't whether I could make more money or gain more recognition by scaling differently. The question is whether that scaling would improve the quality of solutions we provide or just increase the quantity of projects we handle." The disagreement wasn't really about business strategy. It was about different definitions of success and different approaches to professional fulfillment. My family had spent their careers climbing corporate hierarchies, measuring achievement through titles, salaries, and organizational size. My path was leading in a different direction, toward deeper expertise and more meaningful impact rather than broader reach and greater visibility. This philosophical difference became more apparent when I received an invitation to speak at the National Operations Management Conference in San Francisco. The organizers had learned about my work through industry publications and wanted me to present a keynote about innovative approaches to operational analysis. Christine was thrilled when I told her about the invitation, immediately launching into suggestions about how to leverage this opportunity for business development and brand building. She envisioned follow-up speaking engagements, consulting partnerships, and media coverage that would establish me as a thought leader in my field. But as I prepared my presentation, I realized that my reluctance to accept high-profile opportunities wasn't about shyness or lack of ambition. It was about protecting the conditions that made my work effective. The moment I became a public expert giving keynote speeches, I would lose the invisibility that allowed me to observe operational realities without influencing them. My strength came from being the person nobody noticed, the consultant who could see problems clearly, because I wasn't invested in the organizational politics or hierarchical assumptions that created those problems. Becoming a visible industry expert would fundamentally change my relationship with the work and potentially undermine the very perspective that made my insights valuable. I gave the keynote speech, and it was well received, but afterward I declined most of the follow-up opportunities that emerged. Speaking requests, consulting partnerships, board positions, and advisory roles that would have elevated my industry profile but required time and attention that I preferred to invest in direct client work. This approach puzzled many people in my professional network, who couldn't understand why I was turning down opportunities that most consultants would eagerly pursue. But I'd learned to trust my instincts about what sustained my effectiveness, rather than what enhanced my reputation. The real test of my approach came when TechFlow faced another crisis, 6 months after our initial project. Their merger had been successful, but the integration with their new parent company was creating operational challenges that threatened to undo the improvements we'd implemented. Marcus called me directly, bypassing official channels, asking if I could help them navigate the integration problems. The situation was complicated because it involved not just TechFlow's operations, but the larger corporate culture and decision-making processes of their parent company. I agreed to take on the project, but with conditions that reflected what I'd learned about maintaining professional boundaries with family members. All communications would go through David's firm officially, billing and contracts would be handled through standard business processes, and my analysis would be delivered to the executive team as a whole rather than privately to Marcus. The integration consulting project was more complex than anything we'd handled previously, requiring analysis of how two different corporate cultures and operational systems could be aligned without losing the innovations that had made the merger valuable in the first place. It was exactly the kind of challenge that energized me, a problem that required both technical expertise and deep understanding of organizational dynamics. Working with TechFlow's parent company also gave me exposure to enterprise-level operations that expanded my analytical capabilities. I began seeing patterns that applied across multiple industries and organizational sizes, insights that enhanced my effectiveness with other clients. But the most valuable outcome of this project was proving to myself and my family that we could work together professionally without compromising either business effectiveness or personal relationships. Marcus and I developed a working dynamic based on mutual respect for our different expertise areas, clear communication about roles and expectations, and shared commitment to achieving results that served the organization's needs. The success of this project led to referrals within their parent company's network, expanding our client base to include larger organizations with more complex challenges. But instead of using these opportunities to scale our business dramatically, David and I chose to be more selective about the projects we accepted, focusing on situations where our unique approach could make the most significant impact. This strategy meant turning down some lucrative contracts, but it also meant that every project we undertook received our full attention and best work. Our reputation grew not through marketing or networking, but through consistently delivering results that exceeded client expectations. By this point, my relationship with my family had evolved into something I hadn't expected. Genuine collaboration based on mutual respect rather than obligation or charity. Marcus would occasionally refer potential clients to us when he encountered problems that aligned with our expertise. Christine would provide marketing insights when we needed help communicating complex analytical concepts to diverse audiences. My parents would offer perspective from their own business experience when we were considering strategic decisions. But these contributions came without strings attached, without expectations of special treatment or inside access to our business operations. They were professional courtesies between people who understood and respected each other's capabilities, not family members trying to leverage emotional connections for business advantage. The transformation wasn't complete or perfect. We still had occasional friction when our different approaches to business and success created tension, but we'd established a foundation of respect that allowed us to navigate disagreements without reverting to the dismissive dynamics that had characterized our relationships for years. Most importantly, I'd learned to maintain my own principles and priorities, despite external pressure to conform to others' definitions of success. Whether that pressure came from family members encouraging me to scale more aggressively, industry colleagues urging me to increase my visibility, or potential partners offering financial incentives to expand beyond my comfort zone, I developed the confidence to make decisions based on my own values and objectives rather than others' expectations. 2 years after that first boardroom presentation at TechFlow, I found myself standing in front of 300 business leaders at the Colorado Innovation Summit, holding an award I'd never expected to receive. The Excellence in Operational Intelligence Award recognized not just my individual achievements, but the new category of consulting that David and I had helped create through our unconventional approach to solving business problems. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on me. 5 years earlier, Marcus had told a room full of his colleagues that I was nothing but a janitor who would never understand real business. Now I was being recognized by the state's business community as someone who had fundamentally changed how companies thought about operational analysis and problem solving. But what made this moment truly meaningful wasn't the professional recognition or the validation from industry peers. It was seeing my family in the audience, genuinely proud of achievements they finally understood, celebrating success they'd learned to measure by impact rather than just income or status. Marcus sat in the front row with Christine, both of them beaming with the kind of pride that comes from watching someone exceed every expectation you'd placed on them. My parents were there too, my mother wiping away tears during my acceptance speech, my father nodding with the satisfaction of someone who'd finally learned to recognize value in forms he hadn't previously understood. In my speech, I talked about the importance of perspective in problem solving, about how solutions often become visible when you change your vantage point, rather than when you acquire more traditional credentials. I shared the story of how my cleaning work had provided insights that expensive consultants missed, not because I was smarter than them, but because I was seeing the same problems from a fundamentally different angle. The audience responded with the kind of engagement that told me the message was resonating beyond just my specific industry. Business leaders from manufacturing, healthcare, technology, and finance were recognizing the broader principle that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, that the most valuable insights might come from people whose perspectives have been systematically overlooked. After the ceremony, I was approached by Sarah Martinez, the CEO of a major healthcare system who'd been struggling with operational inefficiencies that were affecting patient care quality. She wanted to hire our firm, but more importantly, she wanted to understand how to implement our observational approach within her own organization. Your presentation made me realize that we've been consulting the same types of experts and getting the same types of solutions for years, she said. We need fresh eyes, people who can see our operations without the assumptions that come from traditional healthcare administration backgrounds. This conversation led to one of our most impactful projects. Working with Sarah's healthcare system, we discovered that many of their operational problems stemmed from workflow designs that made sense from administrative perspectives, but created unnecessary complications for both medical staff and patients. The solutions we developed improved efficiency by 38%, while also enhancing patient satisfaction scores significantly. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah decided to hire several staff members from non-traditional backgrounds specifically for their observational skills. Janitors, food service workers, and security personnel were invited to contribute insights about operational workflows they witnessed daily. The results were remarkable. Problem identification improved dramatically when the organization started listening to people who saw their operations from different perspectives. This model began spreading to other industries as word spread about the healthcare system's success. Manufacturing companies started consulting their maintenance staff about production inefficiencies. Technology firms began involving their facilities teams in workflow optimization projects. Retail organizations discovered that their cleaning crews had valuable insights about customer behavior patterns and operational bottlenecks. David and I found ourselves at the center of a movement that was transforming how businesses thought about expertise and problem solving. We weren't just providing consulting services anymore. We were helping organizations develop their own capabilities for recognizing and utilizing diverse perspectives. The growth was exciting, but it also created pressure to expand our operations beyond what we could personally manage. Corporations wanted us to train their internal teams. Business schools wanted us to develop curricula around operational intelligence. Publishers wanted us to write books about our methodologies. We accepted some of these opportunities, but remained selective about those that aligned with our core values. I developed a workshop series for business leaders about recognizing overlooked expertise within their organizations. David created partnerships with several universities to integrate observational analysis into their business programs. But we turned down opportunities that would have required us to scale beyond our ability to maintain quality and personal attention to each client's specific needs. We'd learned that our effectiveness came from staying connected to the actual work of problem solving, rather than building systems that removed us from direct engagement with operational challenges. This approach meant that our business grew steadily but sustainably, expanding in ways that enhanced rather than compromised our core capabilities. We hired carefully, bringing on team members who shared our commitment to observation-based analysis and our preference for depth over breadth in client relationships. The most satisfying development was watching other people discover their own analytical capabilities. Elena Vasquez, a young woman who'd been working in restaurant food service while studying business at night, approached us after attending one of my workshops. She'd been observing customer flow patterns and operational inefficiencies at her restaurant job, developing insights that could improve both customer experience and staff productivity. We hired Elena as an analyst, and within 6 months she was leading projects that transformed how restaurants understood customer behavior and workflow optimization. Her success demonstrated that our approach wasn't dependent on our specific backgrounds or experiences, but could be learned and applied by anyone willing to observe carefully and think analytically about operational realities. Elena's success story was featured in several business publications, further validating the principle that valuable expertise exists in unexpected places. The articles generated interest from other service industry workers who'd been developing insights about business operations through their daily observations. We began offering paid internships specifically for people from non-traditional backgrounds who demonstrated analytical thinking about the operations they witnessed in their work. These internships became some of our most successful recruiting pipelines, bringing in analysts who combined strong observational skills with deep understanding of how businesses actually functioned at ground level. The program attracted attention from workforce development organizations and eventually led to partnerships with community colleges that wanted to create pathways for service industry workers to transition into analytical and consulting careers. We developed curriculum that taught business analysis skills while recognizing and building on the observational expertise these students already possessed. Marcus became one of our strongest advocates for this workforce development approach. His experience of having dramatically underestimated my capabilities made him particularly sensitive to how traditional hiring practices might overlook valuable talent. TechFlow began implementing our recommendations for identifying analytical potential in unexpected places within their organization. The results at TechFlow were impressive enough that their parent company started requiring all subsidiaries to implement similar programs. What had begun as my personal journey from dismissed janitor to respected consultant had evolved into a systematic approach for recognizing and developing analytical talent across entire corporate networks. Christine contributed her marketing expertise to help us communicate these success stories effectively, creating case studies, and promotional materials that highlighted the business value of diverse analytical perspectives. Her background in brand development proved invaluable for positioning our approach as sophisticated business methodology rather than feel-good diversity initiative. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Williams, a business school professor who'd been researching innovation and problem-solving methodologies, approached us about collaborating on an academic study of our approach. Her research confirmed what we'd observed anecdotally, that analytical insights from operational perspectives often identified problems and solutions that traditional strategic analysis missed. Her study documented specific cases where our observational methodology had produced results that conventional consulting approaches had failed to achieve. The academic validation opened doors to speaking opportunities at business schools and management conferences, platforms that allowed us to share our methodology with future business leaders. I found myself presenting to MBA students who were initially skeptical that janitors and food service workers could provide valuable business insights, then watching their perspectives shift as they understood the logic behind observational analysis. These presentations always included the story of my own journey, not because I wanted sympathy or admiration, but because personal narrative made abstract concepts concrete and relatable. Students could understand how someone's position within an organization might provide analytical advantages that weren't available to people in traditional leadership roles. The most rewarding aspect of these academic engagements was watching students develop their own observational skills. MBA programs began incorporating fieldwork assignments where students spent time in operational roles, observing business processes from perspectives they'd never considered. One particularly successful program paired business students with experienced service workers for week-long job shadowing experiences. The students learned to see business operations through the eyes of people who interacted with those systems daily, while the service workers gained recognition for analytical insights they'd been developing without formal business education. These partnerships produced remarkable results. Students developed more realistic understanding of how strategic decisions translated into operational realities. Service workers gained confidence in their analytical capabilities and often pursued further education or career advancement opportunities. The program's success led to similar initiatives at other universities, creating a network of business schools that incorporated observational methodology into their curricula. David and I found ourselves advising on curriculum development and participating in research projects that documented the effectiveness of diverse analytical perspectives. As our work gained academic credibility and corporate adoption, I reflected on how completely my life had changed from those early days cleaning offices while developing secret business insights. The transformation wasn't just professional, it had fundamentally altered how I understood value, capability, and success. I'd learned that being underestimated could be a strategic advantage if you used it as motivation to develop capabilities rather than accepting limitations. I discovered that unconventional paths to expertise often produced insights that traditional approaches missed. Most importantly, I'd proven to myself and others that value isn't determined by credentials or position, but by actual contribution and impact. The recognition I received at industry events and academic conferences was gratifying, but what sustained me was the ongoing work of solving problems and helping organizations function more effectively. Each new client presented unique challenges that required fresh applications of observational analysis and creative problem solving. 6 months ago, we received our most ambitious project yet, helping a major airline redesign their operational systems to improve both efficiency and customer experience. The project required analyzing workflows across multiple airports, understanding how operational decisions affected everything from baggage handling to passenger satisfaction. The airline's leadership had tried traditional consulting approaches without success, spending millions on analyses that produced theoretical improvements but failed to address real-world operational constraints. Our observational methodology revealed that many of their problems stemmed from misalignment between policy decisions made at corporate headquarters and the practical realities of airport operations. Working with ground crews, baggage handlers, gate agents, and maintenance staff, we identified specific workflow modifications that could dramatically improve performance without requiring major capital investments. The solutions we developed were immediately implementable, because they were based on deep understanding of how the systems actually functioned rather than how they were supposed to function, according to organizational charts. The airline project's success generated interest from other transportation companies, logistics firms, and large-scale service organizations that needed operational analysis from people who understood complex systems from multiple perspectives. Our client base expanded to include some of the largest companies in various industries, all seeking the fresh insights that our unconventional approach provided. But success at this scale also created new challenges. We were offered acquisition opportunities worth tens of millions of dollars, partnerships with major consulting firms, and licensing deals that could have made our methodology widely available while providing substantial financial returns. After careful consideration, David and I decided to maintain our independence while selectively partnering with organizations that shared our values and commitment to quality. We licensed our training materials to universities and workforce development programs, but retained control over direct consulting services to ensure our standards weren't compromised by rapid scaling. This approach allowed us to impact thousands of people through educational programs, while maintaining the personal attention and analytical rigor that made our consulting work effective. We were changing how businesses thought about expertise and problem-solving without sacrificing the principles that had made our success possible. The most satisfying moment came last month when Marcus called to tell me that TechFlow had been acquired by an even larger technology company, specifically because of their reputation for operational excellence and innovative problem-solving approaches. The capabilities we'd helped them develop had become their primary competitive advantage. During our conversation, Marcus reflected on how completely his understanding of business success had evolved. I used to think that the most valuable people in any organization were those with the most impressive credentials and the highest positions, he said. Now I understand that the most valuable insights often come from people who see the whole system from perspectives that leadership never considers. His comment captured something essential about the transformation that had occurred not just in my career, but in how our entire family understood value, capability, and success. We'd all learned that expertise takes many forms, that innovation often comes from unexpected sources, and that the most important business skill might be the ability to recognize and utilize diverse perspectives. Looking back on this journey, I realized that being called nothing but a janitor was actually the beginning of everything meaningful I've accomplished. That dismissal forced me to prove my value through results, rather than relying on credentials or family connections. It taught me to find strength in being underestimated, rather than seeking validation from people whose opinions might not reflect my actual capabilities. Today, when I walk through office buildings or work with clients in various industries, I pay attention to the people who others might not notice: the maintenance staff, the administrative assistants, the security guards, the food service workers. I see them not as invisible support staff, but as potential sources of insights that could transform how their organizations understand and solve problems. The janitor who was dismissed as intellectually limited became a consultant who changes how businesses think about intelligence and expertise. The family failure who was told she'd never understand real business became someone who helps other families and organizations recognize value in places they'd never thought to look. Sometimes the greatest gift is being underestimated. It forces you to build foundations strong enough to support not just your own dreams, but your ability to help others recognize their own overlooked potential. The people who called me nothing but a janitor couldn't imagine that position might provide insights that corner offices missed. But that limitation was theirs, not mine. My name is Bianca Rodriguez, and I've learned that success isn't about proving others wrong, it's about proving possibilities right. It's about transforming rejection into determination, limitations into innovations, and dismissed perspectives into invaluable insights that change how we understand capability and contribution. Whether you're the person being underestimated or the person doing the underestimating, remember that value often exists in forms we haven't learned to recognize yet. The most important business skill might not be strategic thinking or financial analysis, but the ability to see potential in unexpected places, and the wisdom to create opportunities for that potential to flourish. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.